Live from Midtown Manhattan, theCUBE's live coverage of Big Data NYC, a SiliconANGLE Wikibon production. Made possible by Hortonworks, We Do Hadoop, and WANDisco. Hadoop made invincible. And now your co-hosts, John Furrier and Dave Vellante.
Well, hello everyone, we're live here in New York City for Big Data NYC. This is the event where we're covering what's going on in the big data world in New York City, also covering Hadoop World and Strata Conference going on. And we have a special presentation this week. We've done a lot of things. We've launched companies on theCUBE this week. We've done product announcements. We've talked to thought leaders, but now we're doing a book signing. So we're pleased John and Dave are here with one of our favorite guests, the Dean of Big Data, Bill Schmarzo with EMC, who wrote his first book, Big Data, understanding how data powers big business. Bill, welcome back. CUBE alumni, Dean of Big Data. I think we called you that Strata 3 years ago.
Yes. You're the ones that coined that term.
Tell us the story. Why the book?
So the book really, the inspiration for the book really started 3 years ago, John. When I did that Strata conference, I did a session at that conference that was called the Big Data NBA. And the aspiration or the goal of that session was to really help the technology people understand how the business should be thinking about employing data. So it took a very business-centric approach towards understanding the value drivers and key business initiatives and how big data could impact that. So I did that session. I think John and you and Dave were the guys who coined the term the Dean of Big Data, right? From that point forward, whenever I started to write blogs, I had a framework in mind of what I wanted to tell people. In fact, I'm still working on a class around the Big Data NBA. I'm going to talk to the University of San Francisco about actually piloting the class. But it all kind of came together. The Wiley folks reached out to me, courtesy of EMC. We had a lot of material from talking to customers and from writing my blog and such, and it just all came together.
Well, you're a tech athlete, as we say, and so we'd love to get you, while we're live, sign the book, get well soon, John, give me a little John Hancock on there.
Okay, yeah.
We're excited. Go ahead, sign it up there. Dave, we're inspiring books now. I mean, theCUBE is the open source content model. We love it. Thanks for doing this, Dave. We've been having so much fun for 4 years now. We've been at Hadoop World.
Well, It's just awesome seeing you. Got to get me too, Bill.
All right,
thank you. It's fantastic, John, just seeing the way the whole space has developed. Bill, I remember, it wasn't that long ago, maybe 2 years ago. I'm not even sure it was that long. It might have been 2 years ago. It was like an EMC CIO conference, and you did a breakout on big data, and it was really interesting. It was CIO audience. There was a lot of trepidation, a lot of, very much so a lack of knowledge about big data. You were sort of doing the big data 101 at the time, and now the compression of knowledge has been so rapid. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, to me what's interesting is that the technology sands underneath the big data discussion are still morphing quite feverishly. There's new enhancements to existing technologies, Hadoop versions and all the Mahout and MapReduce, and there's all kinds of new products coming out. While those sands are going through that metamorphosis, the business sides are starting to realize that there is real value in the data and then the technology to tease the insights out of that data, especially if you target organizations' key business initiatives. If you understand what it is the organization is trying to achieve, whether it's acquiring customers or retaining customers or driving on-time delivery pickups or improving hospital readmissions, if you think about it from a business perspective, it really puts a frame around what data do I need to improve that business process or that business initiative, and then what technologies do I need to tease all those insights. And when you take a business-like approach to this, it really takes this almost mind-numbing amount of technology and greatly simplifies it.
One of the inspirations when we started Wikibon was Don Tapscott's book on Wikinomics, and the whole premise of the book was to put it out there, and people will find things that you didn't realize, and good things will happen, and it sort of worked out that way. And I've noticed in your book there's a great line here in chapter 5. One interesting aspect of big data is how it is challenging the conventional thinking regarding how the non-analytical business user should be using analytics. To me, that's the huge opportunity here that we're not even beginning to scratch the surface. So I wonder if you could talk about what your experience is in terms of putting analytic tools in front of the non-analytic, non-typical BI users, which has always been the promise of
Yes.
BI, which
Yes.
never happened.
Yes.
Is it going to happen here?
Well, Dave, you hit on something that's probably my single most biggest passion about big data, which is if we create all these great analytics, but we don't surface them, or present them in a way that's actionable to the end users, why bother? Right? Why bother doing it? So the ability to take and to conduct and do all that high value analytics, munging through all the data, and then how you surface it up to users changes dramatically. So the average user is not an analyst, right? If you're talking to a brand manager or we're dealing with a grocery chain talking about how we empower the store managers, right? Well, they're not analysts. They don't want charts and tables and Excel things and BI tools, right? They want to know what's working and what's not working. They want to know, should I buy more Tide or not? Hey, there's a football game next week. It's Stanford versus Cal. You better have more beer on hand. And oh, by the way, Stanford and Cal fans don't drink Budweiser. So you better make sure you have a higher level of beer in there. So they want to be able to have the technology mine this data, tell them what's going on in the data, and then make recommendations that they can act on.
So you are in the services organization at EMC. So how are you spending your time these days? Are you consulting? Are you helping build solutions? Talk about that a little bit.
So I have by far the best job inside the EMC, which is I get to spend all of my time with customers, right? And what I'm doing with the customers is really working with them, trying to figure out where and how do we start. What business problems are we going after? What data do we have available to us both internally and externally that helps us to drive that process better? And what technologies do I need to power that? So I'm able to talk to customers, and I'm meeting with, I met with the CEO and his staff of a large theater chain, right? Trying to figure out how they get more people, more butts and seats during off times, right? We had scheduled a half-hour meeting with the staff. Half hour in, he tells everybody, call your next hour and a half worth of meetings and cancel. We're going to spend 2 hours here. And we were up on a whiteboard talking about how do we leverage this data? How do we leverage a mobile app? How do we do this? And it's a great job because I get a chance to see firsthand people trying to tackle really difficult business problems, but leveraging all the capabilities that big data has now brought to us in the last couple of years.
It's interesting, you mentioned in your book about it's for big business and people using business, you mentioned kind of the MBA kind of approach. I mean, this is the kind of discussion, value chains. You mentioned, a lot of MBA top concepts in the book. It sounds like customers are pretty intoxicated by the possibilities. So the question I have for you is, are they seeing the use cases? Is it more of just kind of exciting them a little bit more, or they seemed excited.
Yep.
Are they seeing the use cases? Because that has come up as the key issue right now. Validation for big data is there. Now it's, okay, what use cases? Is it pick and choose at this point? Are they trying to identify it?
So I think what we're seeing is that the organizations are seeing the use cases, they're reading about them in the press, they're seeing them at conferences, but they want to know what it means to them. How do I make this relevant for my organization? And so while the stories about Facebook and some large banks or some large insurance company may be interesting, for them it's not concrete.
If Google can do it.
Yeah, if Google can do it. Well, they like to say, well, we're not. What the heck? We're not Google, right? We're not Facebook, right? So they want to make sure it's relevant for them. I like to coin this term. I think it's in the book. I call it the 4 M's of big data, right? Make me more money. Right? That's what they want to do, is understand how they make more money. So there's a point in the discussion where you've got to take it from the abstract to what's it mean to them. And that's where it starts to become interesting, where you take a part of the business, a particular business initiative they're trying to accomplish, and you build that out, you mock it up, you build a lab around it, you show them the ramifications, you show them the business case, you show them the ROI, you show them the lift. That's when they start getting excited, because now you're talking about them. And so I think with their issue they've got with many vendors talk about the vendors. Most vendors aren't talking about the customer, me, right? And so I think when you get into a dialogue with a customer, you're talking about them, what's interesting to them, what's most important to them, and you can show how big data can make that come to life. That's when things get really exciting. They get all jazzed, and you start to see some of the organizational boundaries start to melt aside.
I want to ask you about the organizational issues. We were at the CUBE party last night, saw you there. One of the surprise guests that walked in was the chief data officer at the Federal Reserve, who we interviewed at the MIT Data Quality Conference. It was a symposium for chief data officers. And the premise of that event, Bill, was really that the chief data officer, if you want to be a data-driven organization, you got to have a chief data officer, and that individual needs to be separate from IT. Now, it was a controversial concept. Now, many industries, particularly financial services, government, maybe healthcare that are highly regulated, you're seeing that take place largely from a governance push, but not so much from a make me more money push. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that whole chief data officer role. Should there be a data czar? Should it be included? Is the CIO the data czar? Should it be separate or integrated?
So is this a setup for the book?
Totally.
It's because I have a chapter here. I talk about the chief data officer.
I figured you must have, but yeah,
And
I really want you to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I think the chief data officer, I think you're spot on. It's separate from IT. In fact, my recommendation is it's an economics major. Somebody with an economics background who can help put value around data, who understands what the data is worth, if I'm going to go out and try to acquire data, how do I put value around what that data is worth to me? And then an economics person can look at it from a risk and compliance perspective. What are the costs associated with not being in compliance? So I totally agree that organizations need to have this chief data officer who's got this economics background and sort of this hunger for how do I bring more data in. Likewise, I eventually think you're going to see organizations have what I'm going to call a chief analytics officer, which is somebody who is going through the organization, uncovering all this analytics IP that organizations have, and even corralling it, inventorying it, versioning it, and maybe even putting legal bounds around it. So somebody with a law degree might be a really good chief analytics officer who's trying to take that IP that you developed and actually put legal protection around it.
So there's the swim lanes of this new organization are kind of funky because you got data science, you got your chief analytics officer, you got privacy, you got legal, you got governance, you got information management. Do those all sort of report under the CDO? Is there a mix? Is there a matrix? Is there, I know it depends, but it's a complicated situation.
And you've also missed what I think is, what we mentioned earlier, one of the most key roles is my user experience. Right? I'm not sure I have a user experience officer. Maybe you do. Organizations should. Most organizations, smartphone apps kind of suck. Right? It's the good ones are really few and far between because they don't really think about it from a user experience perspective. They think about it from a corporate messaging perspective. So yeah, I'll add to that mix by saying
UX, right? The privacy, security.
Yeah. So you need to have a user experience.
What the hell's the CIO going to do?
Yeah, just make me more money, I guess. No, I do think you're hitting spot on. Is that you're going to have all these new roles. I don't know if they report to the CFO, they report to the COO, they report to the I'm not sure where they go, and we'll learn as we
figure it out and evolve.
But I do think those roles, no matter where they report, those roles are critical. A person who's day in and day out focused, and they wake up in the morning, go to bed at night, they're thinking about data. How do I get more of it? How do I protect it? How do I get value to it? Somebody on the analytics side trying to figure out how do I leverage all this analytics IP I have? How do I patent it? How do I maybe even resell it, monetize it? And this user experience person who has a passion for the user is saying, okay, we capture all this data about our customers, but are we acting on it in a way that's smart, that is in compliance with privacy sort of thing. So these new roles, I think, are gonna pop up. I just don't know where they sit.
And it is somewhat of an organizational do-over, to use a phrase from my friend Paul Gillen. If you just pave the cow path, and roll data in, not going to be as effective as you really think about the organization and how to best leverage these new roles.
Oh, I think you're spot on. In fact, I think that's a key point, is because today we treat data as a cost element. I mean, data warehousing technologies are so darn expensive that we've gone through a process of trying to minimize how much data we have. Right. So if you pave the cow path, we'll never bring data in, right? So what we want to do is we want to get to that point where we've got that organizational reset where you're bringing in data as an asset and you have somebody who's really focused in on making that successful.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago where data was something that had to be managed, reduced data, compressed data, backup, it's just insurance. And Chuck Hollis wrote about this. He said the bit has flipped. Yeah. From that to make more money.
Yeah.
So let's talk about there's a thread just in the crowd chat. I love this crowd chat. Dave knows all I do is talk about crowd chat these days. But we're getting some great interaction on crowdchat.net/Strata Conference, but comes up the concept of data artistry is interesting, right? You mentioned
cool term, yeah.
Chief User Experience Officer.
Yeah.
Are you seeing customers thinking about the art of big data in the sense of this certainly is science? I mean, we get data science. We had a quote yesterday on our crowd chat that, around data science. There's about 200,000 data scientists in the world, and that number is certainly going to grow. But there's over 2 million analysts that aren't like the Python writing data science geeks, right. But those are future data science and training. Amen. So over 2 million people that will be kind of, quote, the new data science. But for normal people, right, it's users, you mentioned. is there a chief user experience officer opportunity around the art of big data? What have you heard from customers? Are they that level of walking erect, if you will, in the spirit of evolution of big data? Are they still kind of still in the early days of just learning to walk a little bit?
Well,
How far? Where are we on that whole spectrum?
The data artist concept's pretty cool. It's a cool idea, and I'm not sure it's a role as much as a characteristic. I mean, I would want my user experience person or team to have sort of an artist aspect. And when I think about artists, I think about somebody who is trying to, carve out an experience that's very rewarding, interesting, natural, and actionable. I also can see there's artistry in the data science, that the chief data officer in trying to be creative and paint a picture with different data sources. Do I try to bring in local event data by screen scraping Eventbrite? Do I bring in Zillow housing price data in order to get a better feel for the wealth effect that my customers might be having? So you kind of have that artist aspect of and it's kind of like experimentation in my opinion, but it's got a finer edge to it. It's not just experimenting for experimentation purposes. It's experimenting because you want to change how things look and feel.
What are your thoughts on privacy and big data? This is coming back around because it's becoming quite obvious that, we had Avi Mehta on yesterday, and he was talking about some of the things that his firm's working on. One of the big areas they attacked was risk. And we probed down a little bit, talking about credit risk. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I can pretty accurately start to infer race, religion, sex, based on a number of things, what people are listening to, and what they're buying, et cetera. And there really are no privacy guidelines around that. So it's like the wild, wild west. People are going to start collecting all this data. It's almost like the music's going to stop, and whoever has the most data ends up the next Axiom. Yeah. So what's your take on what's going to happen there? What is the state of privacy? How much are clients actually thinking about that, either exploiting it or being careful about it? And where do you see it all going from a government standpoint?
Well, I think privacy is on the forefront of many organizations, especially large organizations. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, as you alluded to there, is very tricky about, you can't make credit decisions and credit extension decisions based on, race and sexual gender and things like that. But you're exactly right. I can interpret a lot of that.
I can score that.
I can score that. I can be fairly accurate, right, about that. So I think organizations are actually really concerned about that. And I actually think that we could very well see yet another role around decision governance. That is, just because you know something, do you act on it? And my favorite example in decision governance is the Target story, right? Where Target had scored that this one person was a female and was pregnant, and they were showing her ads for diapers and baby cribs, and the father saw this and freaked out and went to his local Target store and read him the riot act, and then found out 2 weeks later she was pregnant, right? So. A lot of data scientists are pretty proud of that story because they knew before the father. I think that's a horrible story because I think there's a point here where just because you know something doesn't mean you should act on it. And I've got to believe that if Target could figure out that was a girl who was pregnant, they probably had a pretty good idea what her age was. And they probably knew that she was underage, right? They had a score that probably said her age is in this range here. So I think you're going to see this emergence of this decision governance type role that's going to look at privacy issues, that's going to look at the data they're uncovering, and they're going to try to figure out, and they're going to make a decision at a corporate level whether I want to act on that data or not. Again, just because I know something doesn't mean I should act on it. And many times I don't want that decision of action left to my campaign manager or my webmaster, who may not have the same kinds of privacy concerns that my chief officers are going to have.
What's your call on this? Do you think it's going to be self-policing, or do you think the big hand of government is going to have to come down and adjudicate?
I think the way the government's playing right now, I think government wants to get involved in everything. So I think the government will. The problem with the government is they're always a decade behind. Right? I think they're still trying to figure out how to regulate faxes right now. So I just don't know if the government will be able to. It can't move as fast as technology. So I think that what's going to happen is a critical mass of organizations are going to have to come together and put together some rules that are both protect the user and still allow the businesses to do what they want. Because if they don't, the government's going to come in, and they're going to come in with recommendations that are a decade old.
So I want to follow up on that because, as we all know, government's not one government. There's like a zillion governments. And so the government's a decade behind in so many aspects, but one that they seem not to be a decade behind on is big data. You look at the NSA and see what's happening there.
The open data initiatives underway, that's wonderful, right? The data.gov stuff, I agree. Yeah.
And a lot of that intellectual property is starting to seep out into, the commercial world, right? It's like to see the guys from Squirrel spin off from the NSA.
Yeah.
So, it's another example, perhaps, of the government funding, innovation, right? You saw it with nuclear. You've seen it, with the
Solar,
internet, solar, right?
Yeah.
So,
I actually think, I'm actually really excited about the open data initiative, and what the government's doing as far as making all this data available. I'm gonna be honest with you, our data scientists use that data all the time. We're constantly bringing that data into our projects. We're trying to figure out if we can tease insights out of it. And it's wonderful that they've gone to this and sort of open sourced all this different data. And so, kudos to the government for doing that. As you said, there's many parts of the government. That part of the government is getting it right. The people who regulate tend to struggle.
So we have another comment on Twitter here I want to run by you because this is good comment from a thought leader out there. He says, at Furrier, I find that getting started by asking one question, then we'll answer many more to follow. Math is just a part of it. I would claim logic more. So the conversation is developing is, math is great, but it's the insight, it's the art of the big data. So that's kind of the use case kind of that conversation. So his point is, it's iterative. You're going through it. Do you find that you agree with that statement? And what's your experience with customers? Is it like, let's tackle one thing that opens up a window into more, or is it more throw a bunch of stuff on the table?
I think that's a great point. I do think it's very iterative. The one thing that we have found is that every company I've dealt with knows what questions they're trying to ask and answer, right? What they don't understand is how does all these new data sources and technology enable me to ask and answer that question either at a different level of granularity or a different level of frequency. And what happens when people start getting their questions answered, and we kind of learned this in the BI space, they ask more and more. So one of the things in the big data space is we see this iteration process happening more quickly. Is that people are starting to see the answers and they're asking the next level of questions, and it is very iterative, and it is a fairly logical flow that they will ask the first level of questions and they'll keep drilling down. They want to know why, what happened here, and et cetera. So I agree with that point. I think it is a very iterative process, and we also, as part of that, we also tell organizations, don't worry about finding the business problem to go after. Find a. Don't pick a business problem, because just get started. And innovation and creativity is contagious. We run these vision workshop processes. I'm always amazed once we start this process going, how somebody who has been sitting in the back has been quiet and really doesn't really seem to be too engaged. They're the one coming up with the best ideas, and the group just sort of plays off each other.
Like the bottom of the lineup in a baseball game.
Yeah, it's
right?
like they're just taking.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we're at the GE event. One of the things is anyone can beat Billy Bean. To use the Moneyball example, which in our industry is a little bit overplayed, but to the average person, that makes sense. Moneyball is a common thread, and I want to ask you that because that's a key value that anyone in the organization can be an analyst without being an analyst. It's a unique perspective and contribute. So that's a key point. I also want to go back to what you said earlier, which is getting a lot of traction on Twitter, the 4 M's of big data. Make me more money, which is clever. It's a great soundbite. Always good to have that on the view. 4 P's of marketing, put your MBA hat on.
3 V's of big data, now the 4 M's of big data.
We got all kinds of slogans here in theCUBE, but that's a good one, make me more money. But what that really means is all businesses are in business to make profit, but it's not about just the money, it's about the user experience. So it's about the customers looking at the things that they do that make money. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah.
And is that why it's getting a lot of traction?
Yeah, and it's a good point is that organizations are with all this customer data and insights and the 4 M's as kind of the corporate charter, they have to carefully balance about the making money portion versus the user benefit portion. I mean, a grocery chain would love to have all of their customers buy all the private labels, right? Margin's better, right? They're going to make a lot more money if you came in and buy, generic Billy beer and things like that, right? But the customer experience, I mean, if I'm pushing things to customers that don't benefit the customer, eventually the customer's going to revolt and go away, right? The customer ultimately
So
votes.
it's not about just on margin, and you're saying it's don't push Billy beer if that's not what the customer is. Serving the customer is what drives the business model, right?
Exactly. You've got to look longer term. Not only how do I build try to get more revenue and profit from that customer, which is in balance with the experience. But I ultimately want to build advocacy. I want customers out there who have a high likelihood to recommend, who are referring me, who are referring other people to me. I want to build a community around what I've got to offer. And if I'm shortchanging somebody, if I'm even for a moment taking advantage of what I know about them, they're going to revolt, and they're going to vote with their feet, and they're going to vote with their pocketbooks. So it's a very tricky balance.
Okay, so I want to just plug the book again. Congratulations. So we're doing book signings here. Again, innovation in the Cube. We have books from thanks to Wiley and Sons. We appreciate that. So big data, understanding how data powers big business. Obviously, we were at the GE event, Industrial Cloud. Dave and I were talking with the CEO of GE and his staff and top customers like United Airlines, oil and gas customers, Apache, ComEd Utility, and then healthcare. These areas have big business issues. And they're big businesses. They have machinery. It's not just math and databases. It's actually, hard assets.
Right.
That's where the big data world's going. Do you talk about that in the book at all? Is it it's still more tech industry related? And how do you relate to industries that are newly impacted?
So in the book, there are numerous case studies, examples of how different kinds of companies are using data or could be using data and technology. I look at it from an industry perspective in many cases. I talk about healthcare, I talk about retail, I talk about insurance, I talk about banking. I also look at it from a business function. I talk about sales and marketing and procurement. So the book is chock full of different examples. And the reason why it's full of examples is because I got customers telling them to me, right? So the book is really, if I had to give credit to any one organization, it's our customers, right? Who I meet with all the time, who have all these great ideas, who have these challenges, who are freely sharing stuff, and all I did is just capture. I listened really well. I'm not exactly a sharp guy, but I listen really well.
You're humble. Of course you're sharp, but you're getting data. You are extracting the signal from the noise out there by talking to the people who spend the money, who actually are in business to serve customers and have an inherent reason to do big data, not that's a shiny new toy.
Yes, exactly. So I have the best job inside the EMC. I get to spend all my time.
All right, so tell us the story about how the book was written. Obviously, you log a lot of miles. We're Facebook friends, so I see the status updates. Stuck in Iowa, on the tarmac. It's fun to hear and it's fun to keep track of. Obviously, we talk sports a lot in Palo Alto, but you chipped away at this. Tell the story of obviously inspired by theCUBE and other the MBA thing at Strata. But how did you just get it done? And take us through the process of writing it.
So Wiley contacted me, and they had taken a look at my blog and said, hey, you have a lot of really interesting material in your blog. We think you had the ability to turn that into a book. And my first reaction was, the book? That's going to need a lot of work. And so I was sitting down with my family over supper one night, and we were talking about it, and I happened to mention, I said, I've been contacted about writing a book, and I don't know about it. And I think it was Alec, my oldest son, who said, he said, well, I think my daughter, the youngest one, says, how much money are you going to make, right? And I said, well, you don't make much money on a book, right? So, and my son said, well, why don't you donate some of the proceeds to something interesting? And I said, well, yeah, my mom died from breast cancer. So part of the proceeds of the book are going to be donated to breast cancer. And to be honest with you, that was the moment that I realized I need to write this book.
Awesome.
Right? It was, there was something there that I had a chance to give back. And so that became the motivating factor. And then, as you said, John, I spent a lot of time on the road. Flying from San Francisco to Chicago is like a 4.5-hour flight, or going to Kansas City or New York or Boston. Those are long flights. So, and I've seen every friggin' movie on the airplanes, right? So what are we going to do, right? I'm not going to watch a movie. And so you'd write. I write in hotel lobbies. I write in the Starbucks across the street.
Well, you're a big guy. You flying coach. You have elbows. You
have
carpal tunnel.
I always get that emergency exit row, so I have a little bit more room, right? Yeah. But I was on the road so much that if you're spending 20 hours a week in hotels and airplanes and such, it just ended up, my goal was to bang out a chapter a week. So it took about 4 months or so to get it done, 4 or 5.
We're here live in New York. This is theCUBE, our Big Data NYC, covering all the action in big data in New York City, Hadoop World, and Strata Conference right across the street. This is an amazing segment with our friend and guest CUBE alumni, Bill Schmarzo, who we coined the Dean of Big Data because he was teaching people, and that's what people were learning 3 years ago, and now ultimately it's validation. The market's growing. The new book, go get it. It's from Wiley's business on big data, understanding how data powers big business. Read this book, it's really great. It's more business oriented, so if you have an MBA and you're not a geek, but you want to understand kind of how to get your arms around it, read this book, it's a great book. Bill, thanks so much. We'll be right back with our next guest live in New York City. This is theCUBE. I'm John with Dave. We'll be right back.